My name's Brian Walker, and I'm the environmental officer for the Forestry Commission. So I have the dubious job of trying to remember all the wildlife and all the cultural history of 20 odd thousand hectares of forest in North Yorkshire, amongst which fungi is one interest. When we go out this afternoon, we'll see a range of different species. Some of them will be edible and some won't be. We don't really focus on edibility, but we can tell you about them as we go along, the ones we know, and I'll give you a few guidelines and tips, things to think about, and why when you see somebody doing it on the TV it appears to be simple, but when in reality you come out into the woods it's actually extremely complicated. So we can talk a bit about that as well before we set off. And then really just a bit of an exploration. This gentleman here is a lot more of an expert than me. My knowledge is something I've picked up over 50 years of working in the forest, being around people like Malcolm. He's much better than me. But he makes a study of it, and even Malcolm would say you wouldn't guess. A lot of the ones that it says edible in books, it just means edible because they won't actually poison you. The ones that if you buy a really good quality fungi book and it says edible and excellent or something like that, then they'll be worth eating. The problem is you've got to make sure that what you pick is edible and excellent. And any single book that you buy will only have a fraction of the species that you find in the British countryside in it, because there are thousands of species and you can't get thousands of species into a book. And so just because one might look like something you've seen in a book, that doesn't mean it's edible. Right? Other myths, let's dispel a few myths while we're standing here waiting. If it's got a red cap, I've actually stood here with somebody who said, well, as long as it hasn't got a red cap, it's okay to eat. Right? Well, death cap, Malcolm, doesn't have any red on it, on any part of it at all, and if you eat just a fragment of the cap, it will kill you. So that's rubbish. There is no stock method for deciding, other than sampling it and dying or not. That is the only proven method to work out whether or not something is poisonous or not. There's no rules about whether something is poisonous. It's all down to the chemicals they contain and the effect that they have on the human body. So the other ones are, well, it's been eaten by slugs, so it must be edible. No, slugs can eat lots of things that we can't. It's been eaten by squirrels. No, actually, squirrels can digest lots of things that we can't. And the chemicals are very complex. So even when it says edible and good, you might be able to eat it. You might be really sick. It might not kill you, but it might just make you throw up, because the chemicals are so complicated. What's alright for one person might not actually be okay for another one. So while we're doing the edibility thing, just while we're here, if you're collecting and you were going to collect some, and you wouldn't collect them on a day like this is awful weather for collecting fungi anyway. If you were collecting them and you've never tried them before, rule 1 is be more than 100% certain it is what it says it is in the book. Rule 2 is you only pick things that look in really good condition. 3, you don't take it home in a carrier bag, because by the time you get home it'll be a disgusting mess. So you use things like a gardener's scrub and paper towels. And 4, you don't mix things. If you've never tried one before, take one, eat a little bit of it. As long as you're sure you're happy with it, you think it's edible, you're 100%, more than 100% certain, and you take it home and you try it. If you've never tried it before, always keep one sample to one side. and eat a bit of the other. Because if you've been wrong, it's very helpful to a physician or somebody at the Royal College of Surgeons or whatever, or the Royal Holloway in London, to know what it is you've eaten. And if you've got a sample of it, it makes it much easier for them to save your life if you have something nasty. It sounds grim, but actually it's just common sense. And you never eat more than one type at a time. So that you know that's definitely the one. It's fine if you go into an epicure shop, a gourmet shop, and you buy a bag of assorted dried toadstools. They've been collected by people who've been collecting them and growing them or collecting them in the wild for years. They were probably brought up with it as children. We're not like that in this country. We haven't collected, and it's just sort of become something for some people in recent years because they've seen chefs on the TV and we've got continental chefs come to Britain and introduce us to different types of fungi that we can eat. So you have to be really careful, and even people like Malcolm, probably only eats a handful of different kinds of fungi because that's safe. And to be honest, there's only probably, even I once did a programme years ago with that big Italian chef, Antonio Carluccio.
The bloody top is bright. There's some power.
Identification course as well. This is a wild cherry, and you can tell the wild cherry because the toadstool has got these rings going up like that. And if we were looking at the leaves, the base of each leaf, okay, have a little one or two little spots just on the stalk. Wild cherry, just spot them. Right, this is looking at the side. Type mushroom. Now, the ones that people sometimes collect and eat are called shaggy parasols, and they grow in fields and they grow in fairy rings in the big circles, but they're big, quite big. This is one that we get, and it's never going to be very big. It's just like a smaller version. But some of these are quite poisonous, so you have to be sort of quite careful with them. And this one has a ring. Can you see that ring round the stalk? Mycologists would call this a stake. That's all the fancy name for the stalk, or a mushroom or toadstool is a stake. And this has a ring. What that ring is the remains of a cover that, when this toadstool was very small, covered the whole of the gill, formed like a protective cover around the gills. And then as it's opened up, it's left behind that ring. Now, in the most dangerous family of toadstools, the death cats and its allies, they have a ring like that. They also have a bulbous base. It has marks on the top, but they're not really spots. They're more like little crazy, shaggy almost. But in fact, one member of this family is called the shaggy parasol, the big parasol mushroom. But you certainly, if there was something that you said you really needed to avoid in the fungi world, you just weren't sure. Well, if you weren't sure, if you had something with a ring on it and you weren't sure, you would eat it. Because it's the most serious group. So, anybody wants a closer look at that one, you can have a closer look, pass it around. Nobody's going to die by handling it. There is another one in there, I think. Oh, I was going to say Malcolm's Oil. You might want that one. Just have a look and see which one. If you can make sure it gets to the guy with the black and white rolling.
Excuse me. What's that one?
Was that growing on a
Tree stump.
a tree stump with a lot of others?
Yeah.
There's a whole troop of them. So sulphur tuft. It be a conifer stump, and it's not edible. It's got a little bit of a ring round where there was a there, but it's not an edible thing. And it's one of the ones that helps rot conifer stumps down. So sulphur tuft, a very common thing. You find it in woods and coniferous plantations. Pretty much anywhere you go. It doesn't have to be old woodland. It's quite an early coloniser, and you see it around. Sometimes growing hundreds of them on a stump. So a lot. So sulphur tuft. For instance, this has gills underneath, like an ordinary mushroom. It doesn't have holes, it doesn't have tubes, it has gills. And in this instance, the gills are fairly close together. If they were a long way apart, the book would say something like gills distant, meaning they were spaced out. They're also quite thin. If we were to cut this cap off and stand it on a piece of paper overnight, and cover it with a margarine coat, next morning, take the margarine coat, carefully lift the cap off, and you will have all the spores dropped out overnight on a piece of paper. You'll be able to work out the colour and the book. You would want to know what, in this case, growing under an oak tree, which is fine, that's where it should be. So you would want to know what kind of tree it was under, because although it might not be growing on the wood, will be growing with a certain kind of tree. In this case, it's a woodland fungi. It's growing in a wood underneath a certain tree, and it will say, sometimes the book will just say in Frondo's woods, which means in beech and oak and lime and things like that, or in conifer woods. You'll probably see some that are very specific and only grow on one or two trees. That's verdigris agaric, so somebody pass that down if you want. And you have fungi, and then within fungi, the ones that we think of that grow in woods are the mushrooms and toadstools. And people use the word mushroom to indicate something that's edible, and toadstool to indicate something that's poisonous. But of course, one man's mushroom is another woman's toadstool. There is no. What we ought to be saying is mushrooms are specifically the field or wood mushrooms of the kind that in that family that you buy when you're in the shop. Something of that way. And even those, one of those, the ignorance and vomiting, won't kill you, but you'll wish you'd never eaten it probably. So if you do get field mushrooms when you're out walking, when you pick them, or you see, I forget where they grow now, but if you see them in the back of a hedge or something, and they look absolutely right for mushrooms, you see them on the supermarket shelf, you put the fine, you pick one, if it bruises yellow at the base, bright yellow,
I can't see them, Peter.
and they're very tough. So they don't break. So these are kind of perennial. They just survive all the time. They last for years as long as the fungus is getting through. It's quite hard that and leathery. What did you bring out of? Where'd you go?
There's actually quite a few of them, and bigger than that as well. Quite small. Take you to the side if you want. It's not safe.
It's not a secret. Is that fluky? Cloudy again. Well, there you go. Oh yes, I know. I have seen that before. Yeah. More mushroom-like, But just because it's called agaric doesn't mean it's edible, because actual agarics are poisonous, quite a lot of it, most of it. But that's cloudy the garret, and it's not it doesn't have any collar on it or anything like that. And it belongs to a group called Phytophthora. So nebularis, I've seen that around, yes.
Some people eat that, but it's one of those that can affect quite a few people.
Well, there you go, he says.
To know.
So it's a no.
I've never bothered.
It's a no.
See where we get to.
Okay, and it commonly gets two rust fungi. So when your plants in your garden get rusts and mildews, they're simply fungi, but they're very small. And while we're talking about these types of fungi, I'll tell you about a problem that is happening in Britain at the moment, potentially very serious. Have very, very complicated life cycles. And there's a whole group of them called Phytophthora. And the problem with their Phytophthora is that they're able to live on several different hosts in different forms. So they live on one plant in one form, and then they can mutate and live on another plant in another form. Now, and that's a fungus called Phytophthora fungus, or a microscopic one called Phytophthora amorum. Now it came to Britain. It didn't come to Britain on oak trees. It came to Britain in rhododendrons, and it very quickly, because it was being brought in on imported seed, plants of rhododendron for garden centres. So it was brought in at garden centres. People introduced it into gardens, even into special gardens, important gardens, and Phytophthora amorum spread through the garden and infects the rhododendrons and the anything like azaleas in that group. Now, in the south of England, it has mutated. So it is not only is it affecting a new host, it's actually, well, because that's where it was discovered, it's infected the whole of Cornwall, Devon, Somerset, the whole of Wales and much of the south of England, particularly in the west. And nobody knows where it will stop. It may be that it doesn't like our part of the country because it is wet, but it tends to be wet and cool here rather than the wet and warm that you get in the southwest. But it's evolved into a new type of small fungus. And so that's a problem because we've no way of combating it. We don't know how it's going to work, and we don't see the signs of it until it's too late. So rather like as a child, well, children don't get measles now, but as a child, you can't stop somebody getting measles because by the time you see they've got measles, as soon as you see a larch tree dying from this Phytophthora, it will have infected every plantation for miles around because there's nothing you can do to stop it. And all of the trees that look as if they're not infected will be affected by it. So it's quite a problem. But this is a rust. So when people talk about rusts, this is what they're talking about. And this particular one is on the back of a coltsfoot leaf. You know the coltsfoot, it's the one of the earliest flowers in the spring. Puts a nice yellow dandelion flower up with no leaves, and then the flower dies off or goes to seed and the leaves appear, and they rather hoot. Okay, this one, let's put my brolly down. It's not too bad, is it? In any case, it's the top. Right. This is a classic one about shape again, and this is known as have a common name of the brown roll rim. And if you turn it over, this is just getting to the point where the rim isn't as rolled. Can you see how it's rolled under? When you read books on fungi, they will describe the shape of the cap. The problem is that as they get older, they change shape. So you need to, some photographic books are really good because they show them as young plants, healthy sort of middle-aged plants and decrepit old things. Brown roll rim, to give it its proper name, its scientific name is Paxillus involutus. And the way you can tell this every time is just press the gills. because they just go away to nothing when you press them. Look, I mean it's a snotty thing as well, partly because it's raining, but they just go away to nothing. There's no other common fungus that happens with. Lots of the other toadstools, they'll break up in your hand, or they'll be leathery, or whatever. But this one, it just goes to this sort of slime. When you press it, it becomes... And that's... some books describe that as poisonous, possibly fatal. You know, but it's very common. And I would guess quite a few people have... Because it's common, it's more likely it's the sort of thing people will have picked and have eaten in the past a bit. But you wouldn't definitely not eat that. Poisonous. But it's very easy to identify. If you get a toadstool and the gills all go to mush like that when you press them, avoid it. Brown roaring, Bacillus involutus. You can have a look. Pass it around, a good one. And there was a field mushroom or something in that. I'm not going to argue with that. There's no yellow staining around the base. I mean, just because other things have eaten it, remember, doesn't mean we can. And fungi that are out in the wild, you can find, I mean, that leaf had all kinds of wildlife on it, and these things get wildlife in them, notably little maggots, and there's a whole range of beetles that live entirely their adult lives inside these fungi. So there's a little beetle, for instance, called Ips beleti, which is a very small beetle, and the adults live in one particular group of fungi. And that's where they breed, and that's where the maggots live. And then when the fungi go off, the maggots turn into larvae, and the adult beetle come out the following year to reinfect the next crop of beetles. So, yeah. I don't think
Don't know much of what you want. Don't get that camera wet, really. We've done very well up to now.
one or two people with trainers who might have to risk know exactly where you got it from, what tree it was growing under, all this kind of stuff, because it's a very difficult group to ascertain. And one of my friends who's worked on these would not accept any field identification at all. He would absolutely insist on putting that under a microscope and looking at the where the spores come from. They actually are where the spores are. And when you get toadstools like this, the spores simply drop out. They're just a dispensing mechanism. It just drops out into the atmosphere. If it's a rainy day, they get washed onto the ground. If it's a windy day, they get blown away and so on. And that's how some of these things as well. So the russulas can be quite a difficult group. And all you have to do is best guess them, you know, unless you're good. Malcolm will know quite a lot. My friend Colin in Scarborough used to, and some are obvious. We had one of the ones that makes you quite sick we had this morning. As you can guess, its name is Russula emetica. You eat it and very soon you emit it back out again. So russulas. Now then, we've got a puffball here. This is the common puffball. And a scientific name for puffball is Lycoperdon. Lyco, anybody know? Wolf, yeah, Lyco is wolf, perdon is dung. Now I have seen wolf dung, and it didn't look like that, but you know, I suppose with artistic license you might say it was wolf dung. When this was young, it was white, or creamy coloured. And if you cut it with a knife, it would have been solid. It would have been solid white all the way through. This is now ripened to the point where the spores are coming out and little hole is formed in the top. Now when it's heavy rain or a big drop drips off a tree, that's what happens. Or an animal nudges it, there go all the spores. And they need to drift around in the atmosphere until they find the precise habitat for this toadstool. So it might be a bit of wood, or some of these puffballs go on wood, or just on the soil. This is almost the easiest I've ever seen. It was brought to Scarborough Field Naturalist in a wheelbarrow. was over 2 feet across. Normally they're about the size of a football, or a bit of muck in the corner of the field for a year or two, and then they've never cultivated it again. Sometimes on the midden it's just must be something to do with the way that the soil is enriched and the organic matter in the soil. And they can be, you know, as I say, from that size up to massive things. And when they're white and solid, they must be white inside. If they're not white inside, they're not puffballs, they're other kinds of earth balls and things. But when they've gone beyond that, then you can't, obviously. And this one's too old. But this is one of the common puffballs. Yeah, good one. We didn't get one of them this morning. Alright, big cap out, and it will be bright red. Now remember that white, that is a sort of dirty white, not a creamy white. And it doesn't have any spots on top, so it's not the kind of typical fairy tale mushroom that people see. But this is Russia hermetica. This would make you sick if you ate it. It makes you vomit. So you wouldn't eat that. And it's fragile. If you just press it a bit, it'll all break apart. These little jobs, there's various names for them. Left shoulder job, because when somebody gives you one, you go like that because it's difficult to identify sometimes. And P-Y-F-O-I. Put your foot on it before anybody sees it. But most here will belong to a group called the Mycena. They're not all quite as thin as this. Some of them, when you snap them, will bleed a sort of reddish brown blood colour. Some of them will exude a white milk when you snap the stem. They're almost all growing on some kind of fragment of woody debris. If they're not growing out of the wood itself, it will be buried somewhere in the soil. That's what they look like. So we can put those down. Or it used to be, it's now Suellus grevellii. Scientists keep changing name. This is found under larch trees. And it's unusual for a boletus. Boletus have, instead of gills, you can see slugs have eaten most of this underneath. Instead of gills, they have tubes underneath. And the slugs are eating away at that one. And unusually for boletus, this one has a ring round it as well. And it always is in association with these trees, these larch trees. So, you know, if we found nothing else this afternoon, I would have said, well, we should find Boletus elegans. That's one Boletus. This is in much better condition. We're back to Barden.